back to my channel and to another video. I hope you're all doing really well and you're having a good day so far. Today I'm going to be sewing up the latest pattern by Forget Me Not Patterns called the Kelly shirt dress. So if you've not seen the Kelly shirt dress, it is a lovely tailored, quite fitted shirt dress. So the bodice has bust darts and waist darts, and the back has waist darts as well. It has a lovely fit and flare skirt and a fully buttoned down button band, and you can either make it with 3/4 length puff sleeves or short puff sleeves, and then it just has a little collar on a stand as well. But the defining feature of this dress, I guess, is this really pretty insert detail at the front here. So this dress can either be sewn with or without this frill to the front and back of the dress. So it has this really nice V-shaped insert on the back and the front, and then you can either sew in a frill to that insert on the front and the back of the dress, or you can actually leave it out and have it as a plainer, more understated shirt dress, I guess. I have printed off the instructions so that I've got them all to hand. I don't always do that, but this pattern is described as an advanced level pattern, so there is quite a lot of detail involved. And if there is quite a lot of detail, I do tend to like to have the pattern printed out. So there are quite a lot of notes in the instructions about fit and how to get the right fit, because obviously this is quite a fitted garment. You want to make sure that you are cutting and sewing the right size. So the instructions give a complete fit overview, give you an idea of what size to make, key fitting areas, and the amount of ease included in each part of the dress. The pattern also gives you instructions for how to alter the waist length and also how to alter the hem length as well. And then with this particular pattern, there are actually 3 bust size options, which is really helpful if you're someone that does tend to need to make bust adjustments. So the bust options that you can cut are small, medium and large, and then it does give you the instructions for how to determine whether you are small, medium or large. So really it just depends on the difference between your high bust measurement and your full bust measurement. Then there are also complete sizing charts here, so body measurements and then finished garment measurements as well. So for me, my body measurements are 32-inch bust, 26 to 27-inch waist, and then 36 hips. So that kind of put me between a 32 and a 34. My bust measurement was a size 32, and my waist measurement was coming out as a size 34. The bust and the waist are the most important measurements in this dress, because obviously the skirt kind of flares out over the hips anyway, and there's quite a lot of movement in there, so you don't need to worry so much about the hip measurement. My initial plan was to grade between a size 32 to a size 34 at the waist. Since printing off the PDF pattern, I've actually decided to cut a straight size 34 instead, because when I was looking at the pattern pieces, to me it didn't look as though there was a lot of wriggle room there, and they looked as though they might be too small. So I am someone that does like quite a lot of ease in their garments, in whatever they're wearing. I don't like anything to feel too fitted or too restrictive in any way, so I've decided to actually cut a size 34, and then I'm going to go from there. So with this pattern, most of the seam allowances are 1 centimetre, but they actually give you 2 centimetres seam allowance at the side seams, which I think is actually really good, because if you do find that while you're trying your garment on, everything is feeling a little bit tight, you can then either let out a little bit of side seam, or of course you can take more in if you need to. So I will let you know how I get on with that, but in my opinion it's always best to have too much room than too little. Another thing to note with this pattern is that both skirt lengths are actually quite short. So one is cut a good few inches above the knee, and then one you can cut at knee length. For me, I'm not a short dress wearer anymore, I don't think. I'm much more comfortable wearing like a midi length skirt or dress these days. So I'm going to try and lengthen the skirt a little bit. I think I would like this to come down to around mid-calf length. I think that would be really nice, but I'm going to see how much fabric I have and see how much room or length I have to play with. So in terms of the fabric that I'm going to be using to sew this dress up, I've really struggled with this particular dress to imagine how I want this to look at the end of it. Normally I can see a pattern and I know straight away the type of fabric that I want to use for it. So I've decided to go a little bit go big or go home here and I've decided to use my really lovely Fabric Godmother viscose for this. So I would actually say that probably the best kind of fabric to use for this particular dress would be something quite stable, like a cotton lawn or a cotton or maybe a chambray or something. But for me, you know how much I love a viscose, and I'm so much more comfortable wearing a viscose that I just don't want to sew this up in a fabric that I'm not going to be comfortable wearing at the end of it. So yeah, this is a really lovely viscose from Fabric Godmother. It's got quite a big bold print on it, and I thought it would maybe give a bit of a contrast to the tailored kind of formalish style of this dress and just make it a little bit more fancy and floral and summery. So the other thing that I am still deliberating over is whether or not to include the frill on this dress. For me, I just cannot decide at the moment what to do, whether to include this frill or not. I don't know, I'm going to have a think about that. But the next stage, the next thing I need to do is actually get all of the dress pieces cut out. So I'm going to do that now, and then I have a good couple of days this week, hopefully, and in theory, to get some sewing done. So as always, I will bring you along with me. The video is sponsored by Serious Readers. As I mentioned recently, I'm working with Serious Readers on a more long-term basis throughout the summer to let you know the different ways that I use my Serious light. So I actually have a floor standing light with a lightweight base, which means that it's easily moved around the house. I tend to leave my light in the living room because that's where I do my close-up work, like knitting and crochet and reading in the morning. But the light is really, really easy to move from room to room. So if you ever need a little bit more focus on your sewing, you can just pick the light up, plug it in, and focus it on whatever you're working on. And because of the flexible neck on my lights, I can actually bend it and get the focus right on my sewing machine needle. So I don't know about anyone else, but I am finding it increasingly difficult to thread the needle on my sewing machine. I'm actually going for an eye test on Friday, but that's another story. At the moment though, I'm finding that I really need to either wear my glasses or just have that extra little bit of focus on the needle so that I can get the needle to thread easily. So as you can see, the neck on my floor standing light is really easily bent to focus on whatever I'm working on. And I can then just adjust the beam width function to focus directly on the needle. If you're finding that you need a little bit more brightness, you can adjust the dimmer switch as well on the back of the light, and this will just raise or lower the light to whatever you need. Over on the Serious Readers website, there are loads of high definition lights to choose from. Not only my floor standing lights, you can actually get desk lamps and Gemini lights as well, which have two heads to focus on two things at the same time. As well as being super lightweight, the light is really discreet as well, and I find that it fits in with our living room perfectly. I went for a black finish with brass accents, but there are other colours and accent finishes available, like white and silver too. All Serious Readers high definition lights are fitted with something called daylight wavelength technology, which replicates the daylight spectrum as close as is technically possible, which just helps you to feel as though you are sewing in daylight, even when the light that you're working in might be quite dark or dull. I just wanted to remind you that Serious Readers are running a really great competition throughout the summer months where you can win one of 3 amazing prizes. The competition is really quick and easy to enter. I'll leave a link in the description below this video. You just need to click that link, pop over, register your details, and you could be in with a chance of winning one of these 3 amazing prizes. I'll also leave a link to the Serious Readers website if you do want to pop over and just check out the range of lights that they do have available. Thank you to Serious Readers for sponsoring this part of the video. Hi everyone, it's a new day now and I have already started sewing. I've done all of the prep work for the dress so far. So I've done all of my fusing of the interfacing, and I've also done a bit of stay stitching and sewn all the darts as well. I'm always really relieved when those bits are out of the way. I never really enjoy sewing darts for some reason, and I'm always pleased when that's done. And sewing darts in viscose is never really fun, is it? So you need to fuse some interfacing pieces on the inserts and then just stay stitch the neckline. And then there are a lot of darts in this bodice, so there are 2 darts on the back of the bodice. And then for the front bodice pieces, there's a bust dart and a waist dart. So lots of darts to get sewn. So I came to a decision this morning while I was fusing my interfacing pieces that I'm not going to do the frill this time. And I think for me that's just because this fabric is so bold, there's so much going on in the fabric. I just feel that for me a frill as well would just be too much. I think if I was sewing this dress in a plain fabric, I absolutely would include the frill because it's such a pretty detail. I really wish sometimes with YouTube there was like an immediate response button, so I wish I could ask you for your advice in real time, and it would be really helpful to have your advice, but obviously I can't do that. But I'd love to know what you think in the video comments. Let me know if you think I should have sewn the frill or not. I guess it will be easier to see at the end of the dress. So because I'm not going to be sewing the ruffle now, I can skip straight on to instruction number 8, which tells you how to insert the insert pieces. And to do that, what we're actually doing is just sewing the insert pieces to the front of the bodice, right sides together, and there are some notches on the insert pieces just to make sure that you're lining everything up properly. This is what the front inset pieces are looking like. I hope you can see that on the camera. So you've just got this line of contrast pieces here. I might end up top stitching those down just to give a little bit of extra interest. I can't remember if it says to do that in the pattern or not. So the front bits are done. At the back is going to be a little bit more tricky because obviously we've got that V to sew in. So when it comes to the back V-neck, the pattern actually suggests that you sew a line of stitching where the V point is, just to reinforce that area. And I'm going to do that. It's actually optional in the pattern, but I am going to do that because my fabric is quite thin and it could possibly sort of pull in that area. And then what you do is place this V insert into the V of the back neckline, and be very careful when you're sewing that V point. So you actually snip into the back bodice V point so that you can open it out a little bit, and try and get the V point as neat and as sharp as possible. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time carefully sewing that in now, and I'll let you know how I get on with that when it's done. Okay, so here's the V insert in the back. I did have to go back in and redo the V point because I did have a big pucker there at first, which wasn't nice at all. If you were to be adding the frill, you would actually be sandwiching the frill in between that insert. So I can imagine that's pretty fiddly to do and something that you really need to take your time over. I have inadvertently given myself a bit of an easier task by leaving the frill out. I promise I didn't do that on purpose. So when I went back in and just unpicked this area, this fabric did start to fray a little bit, so I was a bit worried about fiddling around too much with the V, but I think I am happy with that now. I've just popped that pin in there because I was trying to get the point right when I was ironing the V. I'm not going to top stitch for now. I'm going to leave it as it is because I think that's actually pressed quite nicely. Okay, so next we do the shoulder seams and the side seams. So with the side seams, I'm actually going to tack them together and just try the bodice on just to make sure it's not too big, because I am a little bit worried now that it's going to be too big after my worries about it being too fitted. And then we attach the skirt after that. So the pattern does actually include pockets in the skirt. Because I'm using a viscose this time, I've actually left the pockets out as well. As I've mentioned before, I don't always like to include pockets in viscose dresses because I just find that they can drag the dress down. So I do leave them out quite a lot, so I'm going to do that again this time. took in the 2 centimetre side seam allowance and went and tried it on, and I think I'm going to be okay with that. So I sewed the 2 centimetre side seams and then just finished them. So then I just need to make sure that I take in the 2 centimetre side seams on the skirt as well, and on the sleeves, I guess, and the sleeve facings. So next, the skirt pieces are sewn together, and then you gather the skirt into the bodice first so that you can fit the button band all in one go. So I forgot to mention that yesterday I ended up lengthening the skirt pieces by 15 centimetres. It's possible that I've still gone too long, but I wanted to go too long rather than too short, so I'm hoping that that's going to be around midi length. And also, because I'm using a viscose and the skirt pieces are cut somewhat on the bias, I'm a little bit worried that my hem is going to drop. So what I'm going to do is, before I sew the hem at all, I'm going to leave the dress to hang for a bit. If you hang your dress overnight, if you're using a viscose when you're sewing a circle skirt or anything that's cut on the bias, if you leave it to hang overnight or for a day, then it should drop so that you can end up leveling it. So when I've made skirts like that from a viscose in the past, I've ended up having to chop some of the hem off just to level it, and then you obviously end up with a shorter length skirt. So if you are going to be sewing a viscose circle skirt in any way, it's always best to go for more length rather than less, in my experience anyway, because I've been stung by that before. So the skirt is now on. That was nicely gathered into the bodice. It's quite nice and easy to do that because you have these notches on the front pieces and on the back as well. So the skirt isn't fully gathered. It does have a bit of sort of straight space or a straight area over your hips, which I think is really nice because sometimes it's not always flattering to have a completely gathered skirt over your hips, is it? It kind of adds a bit of volume in that area, I guess. So I thought that was really nice and really flattering. So next in the pattern, it tells you to do the button band and the hem and then the collar. I'm actually going to go a bit away from the pattern here because I want to hang my dress overnight just in case it does drop at all. I'm going to put off doing the button band and the hem until that's done, until I've let it drop for a bit, just in case I do need to alter the hem. So instead of doing that, I'm actually going to move on to the sleeves now. I can't see that there's any reason why I can't do the sleeves at this stage. So yeah, I'm just going to spend some time now doing the sleeves instead. So the sleeves are actually finished with a sleeve facing. So rather than just hemming the sleeve, it actually has a nice neat hem facing. And then there is a bit of puffy gather to the top of the sleeves as well. So here's how the sleeve facing looks from the inside. The facing is finished with the overlocker, and then I've chosen to top stitch around the facing to keep it in place. You don't have to do that. The pattern says that's optional, but for me it does annoy me a little bit if facings want to flip out to the other side. are in, and they're really pretty little sleeves. They've just got a really light gather to them at the top, and obviously because I've used a viscose, the gathers aren't quite so stand-up-ish. I really like the finish of this with the facing. I just think it gives a really nice finish, and I think it helps it to hang nicely as well. So that's where I'm going to finish for today. I'm going to leave this to hang on a hanger overnight and just see what happens to the hem. I'm loving this fabric so much. It's so pretty, and it does just remind me of a vintage print. Does it remind you of that as well? Let me know in the comments. I think it's the blue and yellow. Blue and yellow together for some reason just reminds me of 40s style dresses, and I don't know why, and I'm probably completely wrong with that, but for me that's just what it reminds me of. I love it so much so far. I really hope that tomorrow goes well, and I'm gonna love this dress as much as I'm hoping to. I thought I'd just try and show you what I mean about the hem drop-in. So I have hung this on the door like this all night, but can you see that just at the sides it's dropped so that the sides are actually lower than the center seam? So what I'm going to do is actually lay this out on the table with my cutting mats on there and just measure from the waist seam down to the shortest point, and then measure all around from the waist seam down to the hem so that I can mark the same length and then just trim off the bottom. There are various ways that you can do this, and you can put it on yourself if you've got anyone to measure while you're wearing the dress, or you can put it on a dress form, but my dress form is in the loft at the moment, so that's not very helpful. So I think the table is my only choice. Right, so the hem is done. It wasn't too bad to do that actually. I just had to do a little bit of easing where it curved at the bottom. So next we're on to the button bands. So my button bands are obviously a little bit longer because I lengthened the dress. So what we need to do with these is to turn over and press 8mm on one side of each of the button bands, and then you stitch all the way along the dress. Then you turn the button bands to the inside and top stitch all the way down. I really like the finish on this. I hope mine is going to work out neatly, but I think if it does, it's a really nice finish to do the hem first, because you then kind of enclose the hem in the bottom of the button band and you haven't got all that fiddling around that you sometimes have with a button band to try and get it neat. I'm really interested to see how that goes. So to get that 8mm pressing along the front of one of the bands, it does advise you in the pattern to sew a basting stitch around 6mm from the edge and then press it in just slightly over those stitches. So I think I'm going to do that just to give myself a guide. I would try and give you, as best as I can, an idea of how the bottom of the button band is finished. So once your button band is all sewn on along one side, you then fold the button band back on itself so that this folded edge just covers the original line of stitching here, and then you sew across the bottom here. And then obviously my button band's a little bit longer than the hem, so I do need to trim that. But yeah, you sew along where the hem is, and then once that's sewn and trimmed, you can then turn it in the other way, and then everything is nice and neatly finished on the inside. Button bands are done and they look really lovely and neat. I love how they've turned out actually, and it's making me feel a bit better about this fabric because I cannot wait to be finished and just go inside and trim everything, because this is a very frayed new fabric, and just as everything's getting enclosed, it's making it feel a lot more neat, so that's nice. If you find that your button band is twisting as you edge stitch it along, which I did find a little bit with this, I found that the best way to combat that is just to wiggle the fabric a little bit as you're going through the machine, so almost angle it slightly, not so that your stitching wobbles, but just so that you're kind of moving the fabric around as you sew. I hope that makes sense. Mine was twisting a little bit, and I think that's just because I've got a wobbly fabric which has obviously been interfaced, so the fabrics are fighting against each other, and then once I gave everything a good press, it's sitting fine now, so that's always good. So we're on to the collar, which is actually the last stage. Although I say that, does anyone else, when they're making a shirt dress or something like this, just completely block out the whole buttonhole and sewing on the button stage? I always tend to do that. So I was just going to say to you that the collar is the last stage, but it's obviously not, because we've got to do all of the buttons. And there are quite a lot of buttons to do on this dress, especially because I've lengthened it. So let's get the collar in. So this collar is actually inserted in a different way to what I've done before. So it looks as though the inner collar is sewn first and then the outer collar is sewn after. And then by doing it that way, you avoid the edge stitching around the neck. So first of all, we need to mark a seam line on the outer collar of 8mm again, so quite a scant seam allowance. So I'm going to do what the pattern advises and just sew a line of stitching at 8mm, which I can then use to press the edge up. And then you sew around the top edge of the collar, and there are dots to mark where you start and stop. And then you trim the curved edges, and then you sew the collar to the garment. Okay, so the collar is in now. I'm not sure what I feel about that method of insertion. So it's pretty much done in the same way as you normally would do it, but it's kind of sewn the opposite way round. So you seam the inner collar to the dress, and then you fold it over to the right side, and then rather than stitching in the ditch from the wrong side as you normally would, you're edge stitching on the right side. So while I was doing it, I was thinking, oh, I don't know if I like this, because it's obviously much more visible what you're doing because you're folding everything in over to the right side. So you've really got to make sure that everything is nice and neat and tidy. And then rather than doing the stitching in the ditch, you're just edge stitching along the edge of the collar from the right side. So I can see that there are benefits from doing it this way, because you have a lot more control of the edge stitching from the right side than you would if you were stitching in the ditch from the wrong side, or catching it in from the right. No, if you were stitching in the ditch from the right side and trying to catch the under collar in, then I guess that could be a little bit more wibbly wobbly, and it's a bit more difficult to do. So yeah, I think there are definitely benefits to doing it that way round. But it does say in the pattern that you should insert the collar whichever method you prefer, really. So if you prefer doing it in the traditional way, then you can go ahead and do it that way, or you can do it this other way around and just have a little bit more control on the top stitching. So I am actually at the stage of putting the buttons in now. So what I need to do is go and try this on and just check where I need the buttons to sit. Obviously I need a button on the collar, and also one at the bust and one at the waist as well. So I just need to pop up and see where to place the buttons. I've just popped upstairs and checked where my buttonholes need to be. So I need to have 10 buttons for this dress because of the extra length, and you start with one button on the collar here, so one vertical button and then the rest are all horizontal. So yeah, 10 buttons in total, and luckily I had a little look in my button tin and I've actually got 11 of these buttons. So this fabric is kind of like an off-white, so I really needed off-white buttons, and luckily I have enough of these, so I'm really pleased about that. I always feel a little bit nervous at this stage. Let's go. So 10 buttons and 10 buttonholes later, we are done and everything is finished. I have that finished project feeling where I've just tidied everything away and everything feels relief, or I feel relieved that everything has gone according to plan. I am so pleased with how this has turned out. It was such a lovely pattern to sew. I really enjoyed following this pattern. I think it was really easy to follow. I love how Jo added in some extra little tips along the way, including things that she would do if she was sewing the dress, and a few little things just to make you feel as though you were going in the right direction. So things like, I forgot to mention it at the time, but when you're sewing in this inset piece, when you're matching the seam, she just lets you know that actually there will be a little bit that pokes over the end. So you should be matching up the seams together rather than the ends of the piece of pattern, if that makes sense. Because if you've not ever sewn anything like this before, it can be a little bit daunting when you see things like that. So I thought that was really helpful. The pattern was really well drafted as well, and everything came together really nicely. All the notches matched up, all the dots and all the things like that. I think for me, I'm really glad that I made the decision to leave the frill off of this. I think I would have felt a little bit as though it was too much to have a frill. It came to me while I was sewing that actually if I did want to add the frill into a busy fabric like this, I could maybe have left the collar off, and that would have made me feel a little bit better about it. I can't really understand why, but maybe you get what I mean as well. I just didn't feel like there was so much going on in this area. If I'd have just bias bound the neckline rather than having the collar. So that's another option as well. But yeah, overall super pleased with this dress. I'll pop in some photos and some video as well so that you can see the proper length of the dress and how it fits and everything too. And in the description of the video, I'll just leave a couple of notes on the changes that I made and my size and all that kind of stuff, just in case that's helpful. I think if I make this dress again, which I probably will because I do really love it, I will maybe think about shortening the bodice by about an inch just so it sits a little bit higher on my natural waist. It's fine as it is, but it does come quite low in the waist, so it would be a little bit more flattering on me being a shorter person, I think, if the waist was just that little bit higher. So I think just an inch or maybe an inch and a half would be enough just to give that more flattering look. So it might be something that you want to think about doing if you are my kind of height. I think if you are between sizes like I was, I know I said that I went for the size 34 in the end rather than 32 in the bust. I think I actually could have gone with a size 32 and graded to the 34 at the waist. I think having that extra 2 centimeters at the side seams really helps with fitting. So I would have had like 2 centimeters of side seam to play with had I have gone with a size 32, but it fits fine as a 34 as it is, and I just took the actual 2 centimeter seam allowance given. So I'd love to know in the comments what you think about this dress. Let me know if you've sewn this pattern as well, and let me know how you found it and what you thought of it, and let me know if you'll be sewing this pattern in the future as well. Forget Me Not Patterns have given me a discount code as well, so if you would like to try this pattern, you can enter my discount code, which I'll leave on screen here and in the description below the video. So don't forget to use that if you do want to go ahead and purchase this pattern. Don't forget as well to pop over and enter the Serious Readers competition before it ends at the end of August. Otherwise, thanks so much for joining me again today for another sewing day. I really appreciate you being here. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and if you have enjoyed the video, then please do give it a like as well. Take care everyone, happy sewing, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.